if you push the price of the car up, there will be an effect on the overall demand.
Earlier, a lot of people would pay for what's under the hood. Right. Now, a lot of people want to pay for what's on the dashboard.
When it comes to Kia, I think a lot of our buyers are, very aspirational. They love the tech we are providing. They love the features that we are giving. They love the designs, so the exterior design and the interior design.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Boardroom Brunch on News 9. I am Krishna Kumar.
And I'm Karthik Malhotra.
And on this special edition of Boardroom Brunch, it's going to be all about cars, and more cars. What are Indians driving? What will Indians like to drive in? What will be their choicest mode of travel? And how are car companies going to cater to that demand? And to discuss that and more, we have a very special set of guests joining us on this special edition of Boardroom Brunch. We have Mr. Hardeep Singh Brar, Senior Vice President and National Head for Sales and Marketing at Kia India. We also have Mr. Shashank Srivastava, Member, Executive Committee at Maruti Suzuki. And we have Mr. Shom Kapoor, Partner and Lead of Future Mobility at EY Parthenon. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Boardroom Brunch. I'm going to begin by asking the man from Kia India a very simple question. Your company has taken the Indian market by storm, and it's at a time when Indians have made a very clear shift. Indians known for, when they buy a car, the only question is, kitne deti hai? Or how much does a car mileage go for? But from there, we are in the era of SUVs of all shapes and sizes. Tell us, how long do you see this sustaining? And more importantly, do you see this sustaining for a very long period of time? How do you see the preferences when it comes to Indians choosing cars?
See, all of us humans, we have two aspects to ourselves, rational aspect and the emotional aspect. So when it comes to Kia, I think a lot of our buyers are, very aspirational. I think their emotional quotient is a little higher than the rational one. They love the tech we are providing. They love the features that we are giving. They love the designs, so the exterior design and the interior design. So I think the going has been great so far, and I think we were working a lot on that. A little bit, we have to work on the rational side when people start looking at the cost of ownership. And there was a recent survey which was done by Frost and Sullivan, where Kia was amongst the best in terms of cost and ownership. So we actually fulfill both the aspects of a human personality, but we need to work a little more on informing consumers about, what are the rational features, and that's where we like to go forward in terms of our communications.
Fair enough. I'm going to take this to Mr. Srivastava. I mean, you come from a company that has been having its pulse on their having its finger on the pulse of Indians when it comes to the kind of cars that they like, and you've seen that shift. And Maruti too is adapting and changing and changing its portfolio of cars. But then again, the man from Kia says at some stage that question of cost will pinch Indians. How do you see the way forward?
Yeah, so of course things have been changing dramatically, I would say, in the past few years. And if you recall, much of the buying criteria was for buying cars was about fuel efficiency, about cost of ownership, about value for money, about distribution network, about peace of mind. All those are relevant even today. However, what we have seen and I think it's part of the larger socio-economic changes that come with the growth of economy of any country, we have seen the aspirational quotient also going up when it comes to buying criteria.
From value for money to value for aspirations. And that leading to peace of mind.
Yeah, so functionality is about all the things which I mentioned, fuel efficiency, cost of ownership, so on and so forth. And there is the aspirational aspect also, which is also now got to do with the design of cars, with the performance sometimes, as also the overall brand perception, and more complicated for our country. And we have seen this transition we have been here for the last 40 years. Yeah. We have seen that both exist concurrently also.
I was very surprised to read an article this morning, Mr. Srivastav, that in fact rural India is also now taking on to SUVs. And the functionality aspect that you're talking about is perhaps now reducing in the weightage and the aspiration is kicking in. How do you see this overall India consumption story and what it's going to do for the auto sector?
Yeah, so when you read that story, the rural versus urban and so on, clearly there is a convergence in terms of the income levels. Still, of course, rural incomes are much lower compared with urban, but the difference is less stark now.
Okay.
That's one aspect. Second, because of this increased connectivity or globalization or more knowledge sharing, etc. By the way, number of internet users in India in rural areas much more than the urban areas. So there you see this convergence of choosing criteria for buying cars as well.
Right. So, Shom, I want to understand from you, 40 lakh cars or so have been sold in the country
I was
last
just
year.
about to ask
We are in a high interest rate regime, and the higher for longer narrative in the US likely to translate down to India's central bank as well. How long do you think this momentum is going to run?
The longer it runs, the better for all of us.
But what does data tell you?
But my data says if you look at a long-term average if you look at a CAGR growth for the next, 8-10 years, I see a very healthy CAGR growth. It could be anywhere between 6%, 7%. The jury's out most places.
Yep.
But I think as a country, like they already spoke about aspiration, etc. I think we're here to have a very strong industry over the next 10 odd years. Everyone was predicting that, this will happen, that will happen with the national election, but we still closed out a good year. I think this year is a little tough to that extent, but still the overall CAGR for the next 10 odd years seems to be very
What are the
positive.
roadblocks for this year?
I mean,
Elections? Budget?
Well, elections are nearly done, so that's probably done dusted to that extent. But I think we are coming out of a very high growth phase.
Yeah.
So you can't continue to be just, it's not a hockey stick curve which just keeps going up all the way. You will always go through some up and downs, and this is just a little part of that up and down story because what we've done over the last 2-3 years. I mean, they're the true beneficiaries of that to that extent. And they've done a phenomenal job, I must say. I mean, the way we managed the semiconductor crisis, the way we overcame that. You talked about the high interest regime. We're trying to overcome that. But
the semiconductor shortage, I mean, I'd be wary of actually mentioning this in the presence of Hardeep Brar and Shashank Srivastav, but the semiconductor crisis actually translated to much higher costs for people like us. I mean, we didn't end up buying cars, but the wait time and the cost, eventually, it got translated to the customer.
Listen, if it would have impacted sales on a big time basis, I would have said that yes, there is this, just the cost escalation is what is, look at, and you yourself started the conversation saying that, we're coming out of a really positive last 2-3 years. I mean, if you look at balance sheets of most dealers in the country, if you look at balance sheets of most OEMs in the country, the last 2-3 years have been phenomenal for them, right? To that extent. So from my perspective, I mean, if I'm trying to wear the, I'm trying to do
the consultant's hat.
Yeah, I'm trying to wear the consultant's hat, do a little bit of crystal ball gazing. I actually believe that we're here for a decent, I don't want to call it the bull run, but close to that. And I think the next 8-10 years, we would probably continue to see a good CAGR growth in the auto industry.
But Mr. Brar, ICE engines are here to stay for another decade?
Sorry?
Or less. Are ICE engines here to stay for another decade?
Yeah, I feel so. If you look at the data points, last year EV industry was about 2%, EV contributed about 2%. Next year is likely to be about 5%. By 2030, it is going to be about 15 to 20%, right?
But the government has set a target of 30%. So why are you pessimistic about that number being achieved?
Yeah, so there are certain roadblocks. So the way we expected the battery cost to come down and the price gap between the ICE and the EV cars, the price gap would be about 20 to 25%. It's still not there. It is still up from 40 to 50%. And the second factor which is playing against EV is the range. range anxiety. I think most of the mass market cars today, I don't think anyone is capable of going beyond 200 kilometers. And imagine if you have to go from Delhi to Jaipur or Delhi to Chandigarh, you definitely need to take a halt.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you need a charger, which is a supercharger or a high capacity charger, which can charge your car in 30 minutes to full capacity again, which is not the case.
Right.
So I think the way we expected the prices to come down, that has not happened. The way we were expecting the charging infrastructure to go up, I think it is taking its own time, and the range also is a big factor.
All right, fair enough. Before we go, gentlemen, before we go any further, this is called Boardroom Brunch. There's been a lot of boardroom talk so far. We have yet to get to the brunch of it. So I suggest we dig in as we continue this conversation.
So, Mr. Srivastav, taking off from what Hardeep was just mentioning,
Yeah.
is this going to be a make or break budget when it comes to India's ICE engine industry and India's future when we talk about EV, hybrid or flex fuels?
Hardeep just mentioned that what we believe in the industry, multiple technologies to be there to meet the emission norms which are been put in place or will be put in place in the future as well. And by multiple technologies, we mean electric, hybrid, ICE, CNG, flex fuel. You can even talk of biogas, for example.
Right.
So a mix will be there. And remember, the ultimate target is not about electric. It is about meeting
Energy.
the emission.
Yeah.
And obviously the energy efficiency as well.
And reducing the oil import bill.
That is the economic aspect,
Right.
of course.
Right.
So we have stated that earlier, and we stated that there will be a mix of technologies. And as far as the future of electric vehicle penetration is concerned, I broadly agree with what Hardeep just said. Roughly 20% or so by 2030 is what we look at. And in terms of the powertrain for Maruti Suzuki, we have mentioned earlier as well that for us, 2030 is roughly looking like a 15% EVs, about 25% hybrids, and the balance a mix of ICE and CNG. Okay. And remember, the acceptance of this technology obviously ultimately depends on consumer acceptance.
Yeah.
It is driven. It is
And the infrastructure investments that need to be made
Correct.
to ensure that you have charging or battery swapping, or as the case may be, to
yes.
to get
So
people
so
to
a lot of it is also guided by regulation.
Right.
It's also by what nudge the government gives. Whether it's
Hence my question on the budget. What do you expect this budget to do as far as a nudge for EV or against ICE goes?
See, I'll not be able to predict that, but I would say that the government is very much cognizant of what all is the requirement of the industry, because you have to balance the industry growth as also with achieving those emission targets or such like.
Right.
So I'm sure the government has much more data, and they will do what is best for the industry. By the way, one of the very interesting thing which happened in April, this last month, that is, the CNG penetration actually is now exceeded the diesel penetration.
Okay.
So CNG penetration is now close to 19.5%, as against diesel, which is about 18%. For Maruti, though, of course, CNG penetration is much higher. In April, it was, in fact, in excess of 30%.
And that's for commercial fleets, sir? That's primarily
No,
coming
it
on
is
account of taxi drivers?
No, absolutely not. That's the thing.
Consumers.
That's the other thing which I must clarify, that this CNG growth is not just commercial. There is a lot of these vehicles are being taken for personal, individual users.
Okay. Talking about fuel and CNG, Union Minister Gadkari has been talking a lot about ethanol as a possible fuel. Mr. Brar, if I were to ask you, how viable do you think it is?
See, I think up to 20 to 25% mix is perfectly all right. But if you're talking about 80 to 90%, we have to look at, where are we going to get it from, right? India, already we can see the water tables, going down. And sugarcane is the only solution if we want to get into ethanol, right?
Yeah.
And if we go to 80, 90%, I think we will have to produce sugarcane to meet that demand, right? Or we may have to go for rice or maize kind of crops to make that happen. So, which means if we are making crops only to meet the demand of ethanol requirement, I think it's not feasible, especially during the years when there is a shortage of rainfall. That means you have to put in a lot of water into these crops to really, take it further.
Right.
So if you look at Brazil, which is the front runner in flex fuel, I think sugarcane is their major crop. So, and they can afford that. But I think up to 20-25% is still fine. Going beyond that, I feel it's going to be quite a tricky equation.
So, Shom, what is ethanol really going to solve for? Emission?
I think,
Or is it going to be just a substitute for oil import bill?
I think the biggest aspect that I have with respect to ethanol or hybrid or CNG, it's actually going to be the investment involved. So I think what will be defined in the next 2 to 3 years will be probably the investments, depending on which OEM goes down what path, and the investments will make, because ultimately they're the ones who have to provide the car on the road, right?
And one is the car part of it, Som. I think the other part is, where is that fuel going to come from? So, are we looking at investments from the oil marketing
majors.
companies as well, or are these going to be a completely new set of companies which are going to get into that fuel?
Great point, because cost of transition. For us to talk on the table here is, okay, the manufacturer may be able to manufacture it, but there'll be a substantial cost of transition from one fuel to the other fuel. Think about availability of that fuel across the country. Think about all oil majors having to have a separate dispenser to dispense that fuel across the country. So it's great but that cost of transition should also be built into the whole cost of, say, moving to an ethanol fuel, etc.
Okay, we're talking about all these different fuels and the possibilities of these different fuels simply because there's a lot of concern about emissions. And then we had the government recently come out with the new emission norms, something that didn't go down all that well with the auto industry. Mr. Srivastava, I want your take on the new emission norms.
The CAFE 3, the government is yet to roll it out, but industry has called CAFE 3 impractical. Why?
Listen, frankly, the details are still,
It says 70 grams of tailpipe emission per kilometer, as opposed to, I think, 118 for CAFE 2. So why is it impractical?
So I think there is a lot of discussion going on as to what that target should be.
Okay.
And because I think the benchmarking has been done to European standards.
Yeah.
And we have to see how quickly that transition can happen.
Okay. But explain to me, Mr. Brar, CAFE, it is primarily a corporate average. So it is not specifically every car needs to have a 70-gram tailpipe emission. But across all the cars that, let's say, Kia Motors sells, some could be above 70. Some could be below 70, but at a corporate level, you need to average it out to 70.
Yeah.
But how do you decide who buys which car and how much gas that emits?
See, finally, so you're right, when your average is 110, there are cars which have 120, and there are cars which will be around or less than 110.
Right.
But, the important thing is the kind of investment which goes into, R&D and making them CAFE compliant. To give you an example, when the CAFE 2 norm came in force, the car prices went up from anywhere from 40,000 to 100,000 rupees, which is a huge jump. I mean, at one shot, I remember from pre-COVID, in 10 years, the prices, the amount of prices, they went up in last 3 years to about 30 to 35%. I don't think that kind of price hike happened between the last decade.
Right.
And it happened also because of the CAFE norms.
Right.
Now, imagine coming from 110 to 70 is a huge jump. And I don't think anybody is prepared, and I think we are all representing through SIAM.
But how's Europe doing it? Because Europe is now, I'm told, moving to CAFE 4, which is even lesser than 70. So how is Europe managing? Is it on account of the higher penetration of electric vehicles?
So I think, as Mr. Srivastava mentioned, I think the timelines which are given in Europe, I think the long-term roadmap is very, very clear that it's going to take 4 or 5 years. I think the timelines, I don't have the numbers right now, but I can tell you, I think we are working on 50 to 60% of the timelines which Europe has gotten. So we want to catch up with them, but our timelines are much tighter, and you can imagine when you have to make tight deadlines, the investment even goes up further.
Shom, Karthik was asking you about, any kind of roadblocks or challenges to this phenomenal growth of car sales in the country. Will the emission norms, pose that challenge?
Well, it'll pose a challenge in terms of there are two elements to it. There is the timing element to it, and there's a cost element to it. Those are the essential two elements that need to be adjusted for that challenge to be overcome. So obviously, it'll pose a challenge, but the remedy for the challenge lies in one of those two, right? Either you can go ahead and give investment benefit, or you can give a time lapse benefit.
But there are some incentives already. For example, PLI is already available for the auto sector, Mr. Srivastava. Does the auto sector actually need more SOPs from the government, or are you okay with what the government is giving you?
What can I say on that?
The truth, only the truth, nothing but the truth.
Yeah. But one of the big factors which I think Hardeep also mentioned is that if you push the price of the car up, as has happened in the last few years, for multiple reasons, there will be an effect on the overall demand. There is no doubt, because we are not in a very, our society, our country, we don't have very high levels of per capita income, which you see in much of the developed countries. Yeah. Europe is 50,000 euros, for example. We are at maybe 2,000 or so.
2,200 or something. Yeah,
2,000 euros.
So China is $12,000 dollars.
Yeah, so it's a big difference. So every country will have different effect on the prices which go up.
I'm curious, Mr. Srivastava. I read recently that Maruti Suzuki is now projecting that the small cars are likely to bounce back in the next 2 years or so. What are you basing that data or assumption on?
So it's like this. First of all, the first-time buyer in our country has been, if you look at last 25 years data, about 43 to 46%. That has been the first-time buyers. Right. Now, that's huge. Right. That's because of our demography and because we are a developing economy. Our logic is that since 65% of the population is below 35 years of age, in a growing economy, the transportation requirement always goes up.
Right.
And that happens either through public transport or private transport.
Right.
In our country, probably public transport is not as developed. And therefore, the private transportation requirement will go up.
Okay.
And the income levels for these people which are coming in may not be always, it's not going to be so high. Currently, of course, some people are preferring smaller SUVs as a first-time buy.
Right.
Also, some people might prefer a premium hatch or a entry sedan. But it's not going to be like that all the time.
Right.
And what has happened in the past few years is that the price hike in the entry-level segment has been much higher than the growth in the income levels. As a result, the affordability factor has come down.
Absolutely.
But if you are projecting the way economy has been projected to grow, the income levels in this category will also go up.
Right.
The price element may not go up as much.
Right.
Because much of this price which has happened in the last 3 years because of commodity, government, regulatory changes has already happened.
Right.
So when you project the income levels in the future, and the prices in the future, the ratio looks much better than what we have seen in the last 3 years.
Right.
It is basis this that we are saying what will be the affordability factor few years down the line, which compares well with the time when the small cars were selling in large numbers.
Right.
And that seems to be in the second half of 26.
Right.
The projection is that at that time, the affordability factor would probably be similar to what we saw in 2016 or 2017.
Right.
And therefore, there you can see a turnaround, both in terms of demographic, in terms of economic factors, and in terms of the affordability index that we have calculated.
So, Shom, is it fair to assume that growth in the small car segment is going to come as a replacement to two-wheelers?
Not necessarily, actually. I don't think that it'll be a pure play replacement.
Okay.
But I also look at, when you look at the small car, essentially we were always talking of only the lesser value car from a money perspective. I think, but there's a life for, like, say, a premium hatch to be in that fray. Because this consumer set that we are talking about right now, if everybody uses a mobile phone, which is, a smartphone to that extent, when they are looking at buying a car, they want similar features. They look at similar features. So what people are wanting to pay for is what's on the dashboard. Earlier, a lot of people would pay for what's under the hood.
Right.
Now a lot of people want to pay for what's on the dashboard.
Fortunately, there is no trouble pushing up the category called as cars in India because Indians are currently buying more cars than they have in a very long time, and cars. Anything from the Seltos to the Karens, are selling like hotcakes. The question here is that for a company like Kia, has come into the Indian market with an aggressive lineup of SUVs of all shapes and sizes. Do you also have to shape shift? Are you foreseeing a future where you have to shape shift and make cars of different categories? Because looks like the future is going to be demand for everything from the small cars to the SUVs and the MPVs, if even.
So this is one area where I slightly disagree with Mr. Srivastav. I don't think the small cars are going to go any further. If you look at the statistics last 5 to 6 years, they were about 50% plus. Today, last year was 30%. This year it has dropped to 25%. And I feel there are 3 big reasons for that. Firstly, if you look at all the new launches in the last 3 years post-COVID, all of them have been in SUVs. Number 2, I think in terms of pricing also, I think the norms are getting more stringent. As we talked about emission norms, I think safety norms are going to get stringent. And third thing, of course, aspiration. So I think the example of mobile versus car is quite different because if you look at the ratio of used car versus the new cars, I think in India it is 1.5 times. But I don't think that's the case with the mobile phones. I think mobile phones are much lower.
Would it be fair? I mean, if I'm understanding what you're trying to say, Hardeep, is it fair to assume that SUVs will be the flavor, but smaller, cheaper SUVs, or rather a hatchback with a different shape, is the future?
I would still say the premium hatchback still has some way to go, and that's where the growth has been. If you take out the last 3 years' data, the entry hatches, they're all declining, whereas the premium hatches are still growing to an extent. And now there's a very thin line between the entry SUVs and the premium hatches because you increase the ground clearance by 20 mm and suddenly it becomes an SUV.
If you were to look at the shape and if you were to look at all the aesthetics, I don't know if anything stops Maruti Suzuki from, renaming the WagonR as a WagonR SUV. Just make it a little taller, a little broader. Will it do the job? Will it qualify as an SUV?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. I don't want to spoil Hardeep's lunch, but let me tell you a couple of things which were mentioned. First of all, small cars were never more than 50%. Never. They were at the peak about 47%.
Okay.
Second,
sedans are getting replaced by SUVs.
Sedans were 24 and they are now at 8.5. Okay. So one statistics which we have to remember. Second, when the SUVs started increasing from 16 to 24 to 32 to 38, the hatch segment remained where it was. Till as recently as 2019-20, this segment was still 46%.
Right.
It is only in the last couple of years when the prices went up suddenly, and that is where the affordability factor comes.
That's
in.
right.
Third thing, it's not a small segment. Where, of course, it has fallen from 45, and Hardeep rightly mentioned, to about 25 in April. The last year, if you see, it's around 28, 29%. This is about 12 lakh vehicles. The number of hatches which Maruti sells, about 9 lakh, 8,90,000 or so, is more than the number of vehicles sold by the number 3, 4, 5 players and more than the number 2 player itself.
Right.
The hatches, the small cars that Maruti Suzuki. So it is, if you look at the numbers, a substantial number. Even when we say that it is, is gone down, of course, at its peak, it was about 15.6 lakh or so. Still 12 lakh.
12 lakh.
We sell 9 lakh. And that is more than the number 2 player.
Actually, I have a question for the two of them. Just
please
your
go ahead. Of course.
But we've spoken so much about SUVs and all of that. Is that going to be a peak for the SUV? And is the shape of the car overall may not be hatch and the way at least we
crossover for example.
Do you see any such shape of car changing definitely in the next 10-12 years?
देखो ऐसा है जो हम लोग का what we are thinking is the SUV share will probably climb up to plateau around 60%.
Yeah.
And that is basis what we have seen in other countries.
I think the Kia EV6, for example, I don't know how to define that car. It's a beautiful, piece of automobile, but is it a sedan? Is it a long sedan, a tall sedan, an SUV, a crossover? It's very difficult to give a name to that category.
The fact that it is doing so well, you get best of everything in that. You want to go to a sedan, I think it will fit the bill. You want a crossover, it will fit the bill. In terms of space, it fits the bill for SUV.
Yep.
I think, and of course, from economy perspective, once you have an EV, that makes a lot of sense. So I think it has something of everything, which is why people are loving it, and anybody can fit into that.
We're talking about shape shifting, and it looks like shape shifting is going to be the way forward for as far as Indians and the way they choose their cars, and the way the automakers are going to be catering to those demands of Indians as well. And not the simplest of answers available. We'll have to wait and watch how the future unfolds. The future, I'm guessing, is going to be a mix of everything from SUVs to the smallest of cars to the biggest of cars, all of them put together. But for now, Karthik is absolutely right. We've completely run out of time on this edition of Boardroom Brunch. Thank you so much, Mr. Bra, Mr. Srivastav, and Mr. Kapoor for taking time out to be with us over here. And thank you so much for watching.